Again, because of the level of detail, and we're going to cover some cultural histories, it is imperative that you read these to kind of get the full impact of what the author's trying to convey to you. But I'll give you a little heads up on some of these things so you understand it in context. History is important. I guess that's probably the top thing, and then these are the histories we're going to look at briefly, or you're going to look at briefly. And the reason that is because history, A, repeats itself. I mean, it may seem like a boring and dull subject, and why would we care about something that happened hundreds, if not thousands of years ago? But those things shape where we are today, how we got here, and the decisions or the events of history echo through time, meaning World War II, which most of you probably could care less about or can't name the part of the century it was in or the dates, it still impacts us today, what happened then. And to understand the whys and the hows are key. And we'll hit on those briefly. But that's a very recent history. World War II ended in 1945, so it's not 1,000 years ago. Even though the 80s may seem like a long time ago, they're like dominoes. They one touches another in time, and they do have an effect. It is a key thing. History and culture are, really tied together in a lot of ways. Now, I will tell you this. You can't trust every history you read, or because they are written from a perspective. So history tends to be written from the perspective of the person that won the war and things like that. Now that tends. Now a lot of American history is very anti-American or U.S., but I'll try to touch on that a little bit so that we don't lose sight of the big picture. U.S. history. Now this is the one that you might be familiar with to a certain degree. We're very fortunate to have the history that we do, and this country and its forefathers were geniuses and came here for a specific reason. They came here for religious freedom from monarchies and things like that, and that has a huge impact upon what we became and have become over time. Not that there's not struggles, but it's a very big deal. Churches were run by states in Europe, meaning the monarchy or the ruling class was tied to the state. And that's why there was freedom of religion was such a big deal. That's why the Pilgrims came. Taxation and government oppression were also part of that. People came here to be free of restrictions, and those types especially of oppressive governments. And so that led to a lot of hard work and work ethic in the U.S., self-improvement, practicality, responsibility, pragmatic, individuality, those kind of things that have laid the foundation for a very successful country, i.e. the United States, and the culture that we've built. Not that it's perfect, but that overall it has built to be the envy of the world, and that's why people are trying to get here and come here. And you can read through some of these things. Individualism was probably the biggest kind of a general cultural element in there, and that has very practical application when we're going to try to create wealth in business. Because if I can create wealth for myself and my family, that's a huge incentive. And not all cultures have that type of incentive, which is partially why they are still mired in the poverty that they're in a lot of cases around the world. But we'll look at that. Yes, there was war and violence in the United States, but there was war and violence in continental United States and North America long before we got here. The Indians or natives that lived here fought each other incessantly. By and large, Stone Age cultures without the wheel, and so it wasn't like violence and war came because of the settlers from Europe. It was already here. but there was a definite expansion, and that's been true of world history in every region, every area forever. So it's not something unique to the United States by any means. You know, contemporary social issues, you've heard of all of these. You know, my personal opinion is I tend to believe that, and very confidently, that the people that wrote the Constitution, those founding fathers of the U.S. form of, you know, the people govern. You know, we determine the government, not the other way around. I think if we would adhere to those original principles a little more, we would probably have a lot less problems. But that's not always the case. It's not like they're going to ask me. Okay. So anyway, to sum it, U.S. has been very successful because of individual property rights, incentives, and those types of things. Gigantic difference. This is why innovation, the can-do spirit, Yankee know-how, these are some terms that you may have heard of, and if you haven't, you should look them up, that have fostered, and why we're such an attractive destination for immigrants. Okay, Russian history, a little bit different. It is a vast territory. Now, Russia, remember, is more than just Russia. It is, because the Soviet Union, which we'll get to here in a second, includes the Ukraine, Belarus, you know, the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. You know, there's a struggle there. Okay, so they have dominated territories that weren't typically Russian as well. Tend to have a distrust of outsiders because of the czars. The czars were Russian kings who were part of a royal family. The Romanovs, you know, and a lot of corruption. You know, a despot, you know, however you want to talk about it. Now, they went from bad to worse during the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917. This is when the communist takeover of Russia, and there was a civil war, and it was supposed to do the following things. You know, it certainly eliminated the czar or the king, and eliminate economic inequalities. Did not. It exacerbated those. Gave working class political voice. Did not. Promised it. Never did it. It was replaced with a very harsh dictatorship. You know, Lenin is kind of the main guy that got it going. You've heard the term Marxist-Leninists. Well, Karl Marx and Engels were the political philosophers, the Germans, that came up with this idea of communism. And Lenin was sent by the German general staff to get Russia out of the First World War, which is what in 1917 started the Russian Revolution, the Communist Revolution. And it is communism is a dictatorship, and a very brutal one. Total control. Led to, they talk about deaths of political purges. Stalin, who followed Lenin essentially as the undisputed dictator of Russia, killed many millions and had an alliance with Adolf Hitler until Hitler broke the alliance in World War II in 1941 and invaded Russia. But they were allied. They had divided up Poland between them because they invaded from either direction. Very brutal. Communism is a horrible thing. And millions were killed. Stalin killed as many or more, starved to death, people in Ukraine. Paranoid dictator, every bit as bad as Adolf Hitler. Now, they kind of gloss over that in the book a little bit, but the Russian history after that collapse of communism has had much promise, but it's, as you might guess, that was quite a shock to the system of people that have been used to being the state dictating all their moves, what they could almost buy or how they lived, to now they've got freedom, which can be a very scary thing. It has re-centralized. Putin is more or less, for all intents and purposes, the dictator of Russia. And it used to be a former secret police commander, KGB they called them, you know, very state-centered. You know, a lot of corruption. You could say that They are run by the mafia, the Russian mafia in a certain sense. But there's a tremendous amount of corruption. The population is declining, which is a big problem for economic growth. The population does have to grow. There are ethnic tensions, and so in a lot of ways, Russia is back to where they were in sort of Tsarist times, or after World War II for sure, or World War I, excuse me. A lot of turmoil, a lot of unrest. The Chinese, very old, and the 7000 BCE. I don't know why they use it, but it's BC. BCE is kind of the hippy dippy way of saying before Common Era. I don't know why they've chosen to do that, but they did. BC, before Christ, is what it really means. I mean, in all a practical definition. But there you go. But 7,000 goes back, very old, very, very old civilization, run by dynasties, various dynasties. A king, an emperor. Now, since 49, the Communist Party took over. Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao, you may have heard of him, was, again, a very brutal dictator. They drove the nationalist Chinese to an island called Formosa, or Taiwan, that is still independent, but the communist Chinese really want that back. And they have said as much, that they're going to fight a war to get it. This is why the U.S. fleet is in the Pacific, largely is to protect Formosa or Taiwan, who are the non-communist Chinese. Again, very, very corrupt, very brutal. They talk about premature deaths. I like the way the book says that, yeah, which just means they killed 45 million people, starved them. Horrible, horrible situation. Again, Mao was every bit of probably the biggest mass murderer of all time was Chairman Mao and his communists in China. They have lots of revolutionary programs, purges. It is a dictatorship. Now, they recognize that they were running out, because socialism runs out of money at some point, that they could not sustain this idea of the state running everything. So they let market-driven forces, i.e. U.S. kind of capitalism, come in and generate wealth, which has worked in a fantastic way for China. And China has benefited greatly from it. Now, it is still corrupt, and you can still, if you're going to get something done, you need to bribe the Communist Party member, but you have to be careful. Anyway, communicating history, very much an Asian culture, patriarchal, ag-based, dominates their history. There is now, and there always was, there's always the Communist Party members are the rich ones. That's kind of what it defines. Instead of having rich people, we have Communist Party who are rich and command all the power. There's a lot of unrest in China, and this one-child policy has led to, the abortion or killing of millions of baby girls because people want a son to carry on their name. So there's not many baby girls, as many as there should be as a proportion of males in the younger generation. Japanese history. Okay, up the coast, the Chinese do not like the Japanese, in the sense that in Japanese history in World War II, they invaded China, inflicted a lot of damage and destruction. I know this is recent history, but it goes back for a long way. The ocean has protected Japan, and it has. It's about the size of California. It has, kind of a